Today I want to share something very personal. Back in 2000, I filmed a rare interview in Los Angeles with my stepfather, Gahan Wilson, one of America's most unique and unforgettable cartoonists. You probably know his work from The New Yorker, Playboy, National Lampoon, where his dark humor and macabre style influenced generations of artists. What you'll see here isn't about his art, it's about the man, in his own words. And this isn't just an interview for me. It's family history, and it's also a piece of American history. And I'm happy to share it as part of American Stories Archives. So let's go back in time to 2000 and my conversation with Gahan Wilson.
I don't think I decided to become a cartoonist, or if I did, I don't remember when it was, because I always wanted to be one. And I think that's the case with everybody I know in any art area. They are just sort of stuck with being whatever it is they want to be this thing. And so I just automatically drew little pictures all the time. And again, everybody I know that is a cartoonist who succeeded was one of those weird kids that, their test papers, any scrap of paper that's in front of them, they'll cover it with funny little faces. I remember one time when I was president of this cartoonist organization, and there was all these fantastic artists there. They were just, the best. And we were engaged in very serious negotiation, very important publisher, and trying to solve a very serious problem. And so you're doing this heavy discussion of how to approach this person and what terms to present to them, and so on and so on. And right in the middle of this, I noticed that this guy next to me is drawing this funny little drawing on these notes we've prepared. We've done like a meeting where everybody's got these notes neatly typed up, reference. And then I see this other fellow do the same thing, and then this woman, cartoonist, she's doing the same thing. And I'm doing the same. We're all doing it. We're all drawing funny little pictures. And I thought, well, this is hopeless. And it turned out it was. It's hopeless. And I think an artist is just stuck with it. It's just the thing that just comes, and that's it. And what's even worse is you can't get rid of it. It's just part of the organism. Out of the Midwest, which is very important to what I am. It's not like this here at all. No surf out there, at least not this kind. And although there was some good waves, like Michigan. I remember as a kid. One time seeing it's a local newspaper in Evanston, and on the front page, the center of it, they had this small picture of this agreeable looking man and this old-timey bathing suit, and he's smiling into the camera, and he's waving like that and at you, and in the caption says, picture of Mr. So-and-so, so-and-so, waving at his wife, who was taking the picture. And back, Mr. So-and-so, is a huge wave, which swept Mr. So-and-so into the ocean, into the lake, where he drowned. And I thought it was a pretty great first page picture for a local newspaper. The Midwest is there's a neat thing about, it's a crazy place. I think it's the weirdest part of the country in its way. But unlike like here, like in California, where they're very proud of being odd, and or in say the South, where they like to talk about the strangeness of the stuff. You know, all of them sort of going up on a grade to like Louisiana, New Orleans, where they really most of them. Well, in the Midwest, they're in denial. They won't admit it's strange, that's what makes it all stranger. And that's, I think, what makes the strangeness, which allows the strangeness to sort of grow more than in any other place. It's like Robert Bloch, who wrote Psycho, and a whole bunch of spooky stuff. The Psycho was based on Ed Gein, who was a Midwestern type, but there was one. He's a Midwestern country guy. And in this very small community, he did all kinds of these this shocking, appalling things. Most of it being grave robbing and making masks and costumes and so on out of the skins of these people that he'd stolen. And he'd show the masks to little children who we babysat for. And the kids would tell their parents about these masks, and nobody's did a thing about it. It never crossed their minds that there's something odd about these masks that the children were describing, or about Ed, or about any of it, because they were in Midwestern denial. And so it went on and on. And was only finally apprehended after a couple of fatalities, and they actually stumbled across a corpse. Amazing. So that's the Midwest. And Evanston was full of weird things, but they would not think of it as being weird. They would. There's also there's a thing about, again, the whole theme of just artists. There's a Henri Matisse has a great quote from him where he says the most important thing for an artist is not to let the child die. And that's not to say, that's the quote. And he's not saying one should be childish or childlike. I mean, that just be at the mercy of society, which I'm afraid artists are kind of at the mercy of society, but really at the mercy of society. That you should not lose that child. You should not chop it off and kill it and bury it, because it's vital to have it part of your present company for your whole entire life. If you're to be successful, if you're to have the freshness of an artist, you've got to have that vulnerability and that surprise that children have at ordinary things, which are surprising, but a lot of grown-ups cease to be surprised by them, which is a pity. I mean, if you're in a touristy place like this, and the tourists will say, "Oh, isn't this something?" Looking at this sort of a scene, and be aware of it, and express appropriately that they're impressed by it. But if they're like, say, they're going to some place or other by train, and they go into Grand Central Station, and they won't react at all to it usually. But if they've got a little kid with them, the kid will, because the kid will just take it in, and you can just. It's very interesting to be in a place like some spectacular public place, and just watch the grown-ups with kids, and you'll see grown-ups and they're coming in, they're sort of completely like that, and they're thinking about nothing but schedules and how much it will cost, and are they on time, and all abstract stuff like that, and are dimly aware of where they are. But the kid will look around with astonishment, see all this, see the constellations painted on the ceiling, and you know, the magnificence of this huge, wonderful place. So the artist has to keep that kid alive, so that he or she will be amazed and astonished wherever they go. I have no recollection. Way before I can remember consciously. There's these little drawings I did as a kid, which are very, very interesting and spooky drawings, very like the stuff I do now. And it's got this spooky atmosphere and weird goings on, and I was so young that I couldn't even write words. So my mother would put this, and I came across them after my parents had died, and she set them aside, and they'd say this strange monster come to kill us all is my favorite caption. And why they didn't take me to a psychiatrist or something, I have no idea. But they're really a good predictor. Very often you get the ideas for cartoons, from regular, ordinary, day-to-day life. Like, for example, Playboy getting together is a good example of a sort of role that luck plays in any career. The thing was that I always visited my parents every Christmas. I was living in Greenwich Village in this little tenement apartment, and I would go on the cheap to see them and spend a couple of days and then come back again. And so a little bit before that, time came around, I came across this really great magazine called Trump on the newsstands, and it was a very classy, very expensive, very posh version of Mad magazine. And later on, I realized that it was the editor was Harvey Kurtzman, who had made Mad magazine, and Hefner had hired him away and to create this thing, which was really a swell magazine. So I looked up the masthead, and it gave an address which was in Chicago, and phone number. So I called them up, and I said I'd be in Chicago from such and such a period, and could I make an appointment? And I was put through to somebody else, and the other person said that they'd be delighted, and by all means, we set up an appointment. And so time came there. I was in Chicago visiting, and off I went to the address. It was a nice little kind of brownstone thing. And I came in the entrance business, and there was the receptionist, and I said, I'm Gahan Wilson. I've come to see somebody, I have an appointment with somebody, and I went to see somebody at Trump magazine. And she looked at me with sort of pity, and she said, well, Trump magazine is in New York City. And I thought, I thought, oh, this, I really screwed up in some weird way. But she said, well, wait a minute. And then she called somebody, and she said, just please stay right there. And the door opened, and out came this fellow, and he said, hi, Mr. Wilson, I am Art Paul, and is looking forward to seeing you. And so, it seems to be it was all right. I had no idea who F was. And I was led to this little staircase, and I went up this little narrow staircase and opened the door at the top of it, and I was in a room which was completely dark except for one lamp sitting on a desk, and there was this man on the telephone seated at the desk, and that was F. And he smiled at me, and he waved me to a chair, and he continued the conversation he'd been having on the phone. Well, I sat there silently listening, and what he said was, well, we think it's a very good article, and we think it's well written and intelligent and very interesting all around, but the problem is that its attitude is anti-sin, and we're pro-sin. And that was quite startling to me. He went and said a few other things, and very polite things, and he hung up, and then he stood, and he reached over the desk and shook my hand and said, "I've been waiting for you." And that was how we got together, complete and absolute fluke. And he and I have gotten along really very well indeed through the years, and it's been terrific. It's been a wonderful association. And that's how it happened. Total mistake. I get my ideas from basically from day-to-day life, because that's where everything is. I get it from just ordinary walking around, and of course from television and from papers and what. The news is a wonderful source of ideas, and there's just all these ridiculous things going on constantly, and it's very seldom do I get the idea directly. I mean, seldom. I mean, it's not once in the blue moon. One time I remember I was in, I guess it was Bloomingdale's, and I was on the escalator, and there was a nun a few steps ahead of me, and her habit got caught in the treads and the machinery and started sucking it in, and she was being pulled down, so she was kind of on the banister when somebody spotted it, some employee, and ran over and pushed the stop button, and they rushed up and tugged at her habit, which was jammed, so then they reversed the escalator, and sure enough, the stairs sort of slowly regurgitated the habit, and she was freed. And immediately I thought of a cartoon, which I later sold to Playboy, which has a couple of, has a like floor walker with a little carnation in his lapel, and another employee of a department store, and they're looking up at an escalator, and they're standing at its base, and the escalator is sucking in people. They're being crunched and pulled down into the bowels of the stairs as they come down, and the floor walker is saying to this other fellow, "It's really been one of those days." So that's a direct one. But usually what happens is that I'll absorb all of this stuff, and it'll sort of cook. And then when I come to do ideas, which is since I make my living at it, what I have to do is I have to, one of the freelance people have to be very disciplined, so I sit down and now I'm going to think up ideas, and I do, and these things have been in there and they've been bubbling away, and they start coming up, and they'll have, by this weird process, they'll just emerge.
All right, well, one thing, of course, that is always a great help is your totally reliable classic monsters, such as you know, Frankenstein monster, Dracula, and they, you know, you never miss with those. And they're one thing about them that's so good is that they're they're real in the sense that they wouldn't move us, they wouldn't interest us at all, except that they're about us. They're the Frankenstein monster is a great example of somebody who is socially inept. Can't get, you know, just he wants to get along, keeps wanting to be friends with people, but he goes barging in the door and everybody runs. Is terrified of him. He's just no social graces whatsoever. And King Kong, for example, it's like, you know, a vacation in New York, which just didn't work out. And they're all, mostly the thing about them is they're stuff that we are, anybody, you know, you've been like when you're an adolescent, you go through a long period of being a monster, and you just feel that you're grotesque, you don't fit in, and so you're desperately trying not to be a monster, and you know, you just get more and more monstrous. It's all, so there's just a lot of sympathy. It's a very sympathetic kind of thing, and there's a vulnerability about them which is very touching. And the other thing is that they're funny. If you go to a horror movie and they don't do a good job with the horror movie, they blow it with this, you know, they don't get it right, people will laugh, and because it's very, very funny to see a monster that doesn't work. It's really ludicrous. The fascinating about horror and humor is that they're really essentially the same, they're doing the same trick on you, both of them. They defeat your sensible understanding of life. I mean, it's interrupted or tossed off by both horror and humor. It's like a joke is, somebody once said that the joke was was like a dispatch and wreckage of the train of thought. You set up a situation and you put, you know, lead person to certain expectations, and then pow, it all, you hit them with this ridiculous thing which throws it completely off, and and you laugh because you're startled and surprised, and you see that you've been had, and that this whole everything was silly. You were misled, and it's startled, and you're laughing. Whereas horror, in effect, does the same kind of thing. It suddenly springs this thing on you, which alarms and frightens you, and you have another non-intellectual kind of reaction. You get woo, sort of thing. So if you get the audience screaming or you get them laughing, both times what you've done is you've shaken them out of their ordinary mental situation. You've taken them out of what they usually, you know, the little road we go along. You bust it up, And it's refreshing. It's that's one reason why it's so entertaining. It gets you out of all of that into territory that you're usually not in. It's funny. Funny, haha, funny, strange, both same time. The earliest one I knew by name was Chester Gould, who did the comic strip Dick Tracy in the newspapers. And I remember being astonished at how spooky it was. They did a well-intentioned movie which was supposedly based on Dick Tracy and kind of a nostalgic-y kind of a thing, but it was completely missed the point because it was all sort of cutesy and timidly, you know, gentle and so on. Whereas what Gould did was he had this. It was a rough and tough strip, and I can't imagine. I'm amazed he got away with it because. It was originated because of the guys like Dillinger and Babyface Nelson and so on, which were running amok in the Midwest and robbing banks and shooting up people, and so that's the early ones were that kind of character, and they were rough and they were tough, and people would get shot and bleed, and not only that, but if the villain, as things got bad for him, like he could get shot and be on the run, the wound could get infected and fester, and he could die horribly, and it was really it was extraordinary. There was torture, and there was really nasty activities afoot, and nobody seemed to realize how really spooky it was. I remember there was one eerie little sequence, which is part of one element of it. It took place in one of these huge mansions, which some Robert Baron had built in Chicago. He was typical big old, heavy old building, and in it there was this weird rich lady who was very remote, and her sort of wistful daughter. And the wistful daughter would every so often get a hankering, would pester the mother, and the mother would say, "Go down and amuse yourself." And the kid would decide it was time for some ice cream, and so she'd go down these staircases into this huge basement in the bottom of this mansion, and there was this enormous freezer, and so she'd open the freezer and she'd grope around inside of it, and there was ice cream stored there, and she'd get some ice cream, and you'd see something glinting over in the far corner of this freezer, odd looking something, and as the strip progressed, as this went on for weeks, as comic strips did, they'd move very leisurely, developed very so in a fashion so you could sort of do very slow exposures and twists and turns, and you began to realize that there was something extremely sinister about this object, which was in the far reaches of the freezer, and it turns out it was the frozen body of this child's father. And it was quite, I'm going, whoa, and my eyes bugged. It was full of that kind of stuff. So, and then also Tracy, the Gould did his drawing style was kind of interesting. It was sort of like a blueprint. It was very simple, very clear, and if there was any possibility of confusion, he would clear that up by having little instructions. Like one famous thing about Dick Tracy, he had a wrist radio, and he'd talk in the wrist radio. When he went like this to talk in the wrist radio, an arrow would be drawn in by Gould, pointing at this thing, and it would say, "Two-way police wrist radio," just in case anybody reading the script was unclear as to what it might be. It was just a swell thing. And another aspect of it, his villains were all horrible looking, or deformed, or scarred, or something. They had these magnificently grotesque faces, which were all twisted and bent. And the thing that was wonderful about it was that Gould, I mean, you thought, well, this guy doesn't draw too well, but really he did, because this, have this face which you would think would have, be very difficult to change expressions, but he'd do it. You'd have these little subtle plays of expression on. I remember being particularly impressed by one called Prune Face, who had been hideously burned, and he looked like a prune, but still, if he was mad, you could tell he was mad, and if he was smiling, you could tell he was smiling, and so on and so on. Anyway, I loved him, and then there was just endless other ones. Of course, in the magazine thing, Charles Addams was a huge influence, and I really liked his stuff. Particularly, the peak of it, I thought, came sort of during the war. It was wonderful, just gorgeous stuff. And then as I got sort of deeper into art, which I went to the Art Institute in Chicago after going to commercial schools, because commercial schools were fine, but I found them superficial, and I wanted to learn how to draw, and I wanted to learn how to, all these things about how do you do these things. And the Art Institute had a fine art course which lasted for 4 years, and it was very pragmatic, and you just painted and drew and painted and drew and did graphics and did woodcuts and so on, and you really learned all kind, nuts and bolts. It was a trade school, and they also had a nice little history thing, which was very intelligently taught. So I was exposed to people who I just dived into when I realized they existed, like Goya, for example, hugely influential. I'd look at the guy's stuff and copy it and see how he did these things, and so on and so on and so on. So it just there's no end to the influences. I had an interesting thing happen regarding style and so on of my work, which was at one point there was a huge bunch of Playboy imitator magazines, and they did their very best to make their magazines look as much as possible like Playboy. And among the things they did was they would have somebody who would be kind of the Gahan Wilson for that magazine, and it would generally just be some guy who would do spooky stuff, one kind or another. But there was one magazine, one of the more prominent ones, which is, I cannot think of the name, and I'm not being kindly here, I just can't think of the name, where they hired some guy whose name is, I don't know what it was some Spanish, and I can't think what it was. And it was very interesting, because obviously what they'd done is they'd collected every cartoon I'd ever done, and this fellow studied them, and so these cartoons would appear, and there'd be a door lifted from something I'd done in one cartoon, and a window from another, and the figures would be bits and pieces of figures from God knows all various of my cartoons, and the huge effort was made to make the thing look as much as possible like one of my cartoons, even scritchy, scratchy shading and so on, the palette and so on. And I found it kind of interesting. Fortunately for me, they weren't very funny, so there were no threat of any kind. But Playboy was really annoyed, and so they got their lawyers onto the job of sue them or whatever, and they looked into it, and they found out that there's only 2 countries in the world who have any kind of law against imitating another artist's style, and they are France and Italy, which is not all that surprising. And that's it. And at first, I was sort of taken aback and kind of annoyed. And then I thought about it, and I thought, well, yeah, I mean, everybody is, and that's everybody, is a mass of influences of other people. I mean, we don't come out of nowhere. So it's ridiculous to bar you from working in somebody else's style, because that's the only way you're ever going to learn how to start out. You start out by aping other people, and then you ape this person here and a person that there, and then the whole thing kind of turns into, together with whatever is coming from you, into, if you pursue it, your own thing. So I ended up thinking, well, that's perfectly, they're right. There shouldn't be a law against imitating people. So I've never minded. As a matter of fact, I'm very flattered if somebody is influenced by me. And I've had people, darn good people too, and they come up and they have, said, I loved your stuff when I was a kid, and I was very heavily influenced by it, and thank you.
I am so good at this, I can drive and film at the same time.
God, that's amazing. I think it's illegal to shoot a movie while driving. Seriously, folks.
Seriously, folks.